Seth Grove Unleashed.
So we're back in Harrisburg after a July 4th break, which was a weird July 4th break, wasn't it?
So we had session it got canceled. So we're supposed to be in Friday, Saturday, Sunday. They all got canceled. We're back in session today. We're scheduled for Monday and Tuesday this week. We'll see what happens. To date, there are still no budget bills slated to vote at all.
So we're 8 days late at this point. No movement, no amendment, nothing.
Nothing. So we'll see what happens this week, see if they actually reach an agreement. What we keep hearing is we're close and it's a slow negotiation.
So we're being treated like mushrooms.
Mushrooms, yes. Kept in the dark and fed a lot of poop.
So how does this compare with previous session years trying to get a budget done, even ones that were late in the past?
Reminds me of last year. You got to tackle the big issues. The Senate Republicans have been out there on school choice and massive $3 billion income tax cut. For other things like regulatory reform, some other agenda items they want to get done, mixed with the governor's desire and the House Democrats to spend $3 billion more than what we have, with a new funding formula, which we've never done during a budget before. So it's a lot to negotiate, but that's what you get with divided government. I have no doubt if House Republicans were in charge, we'd have a budget done by now, but that's just the realistic of how we've governed over the past few years. So
where's the governor been?
The governor's been everywhere but in Harrisburg still. So part of the problem is when you have an impasse between two entities, you need that third in there negotiating.
Right, and you're not seeing that. You're not seeing the leadership there. And Senator Pittman on Wednesday held a press conference where he talked about the differences on the school code, and he talked a little bit about the data that was being used for the BEF. It seems like the Democrats controlled the BEFC, the Basic Education Funding Formula Commission.
Right.
And because they controlled that, they seem to think they can just ramrod that right through the budget process, but those are two different things, aren't they?
Correct. Ultimately, you need Republican votes to get anything done, particularly in the Senate, controlled by Republicans, and it's something they missed. So it wasn't a bipartisan product they worked together on. They just wanted a political talking point, which was an epic failure. I mean, and that's a stark contrast. It was a bad report.
No, that's a stark contrast to the first BEFC, which did work in a bipartisan manner.
Passed unanimously. Right. Everybody was involved. Moved through the General Assembly.
Two administrations. I mean, it truly was a bipartisan product. But here we sit and.
So what's up with this year's BEFC formula?
It was just very partisan. House Democrats flexing their muscles in the majority, didn't want to work with others, and that's what we're seeing in the budget negotiations as well.
So it was almost like this was set up to be a failure because the Democrats decided to ram through this proposal in the BEFC. They said, we're going to do what we want to do. The hell with you Republicans. And now they actually have to cash the check. And the check isn't going to cash because there are other parties that need to sign off.
They started with a point of we don't need to work with Republicans. We're going to get the report we want. And that continued for many, many months until it hit the grind of actually having to be bipartisan. And here we sit.
So off the budget topic a little bit, you have an election bill that is working its way through the House that you partnered with Representative Ben Sanchez from Montgomery County. You want to talk a little bit about House Bill 2473? What does it do?
Yeah, so Representative Sanchez put out a co-sponsorship memo maybe 2 months ago. I saw it. It intrigued me. The actual bill language wasn't posted on it, and I asked him to send me over because I had an interest. Generally, the bill originally did 4 things, made some changes. Two of the things made changes, giving the judiciary timelines for adjudicating election lawsuits. The third thing changed some stuff with counties and their certification. Fourth thing, actually put a requirement on Department of State to do certification. Right now they don't have any. And there's no real timeline set in statute for the judiciary to handle court cases. I had an interest in it, got the language, and negotiated with him, House Democrats, and the Department of State, and ultimately came back with a compromise with 3 things out of those 4 things in it. So you have some some guidance in statute, because judiciary really doesn't need to listen, but trying to put some guidance in statute for the judiciary to handle election lawsuits. And then the 4th thing was making a hard certification date for Department of State to certify elections, because right now they don't have any. And what I'm very worried about, and what happened in the past 2 presidential elections, is in 2016 when President Trump won Pennsylvania, Department of State slow walked that as long as they could. So when you're dealing with presidential elections, you have the Electoral College. There's a safe harbor date of which states needed to submit their electoral vote count to Congress. After the 2020 election, Congress changed that. But in 2020, they lightning speed did a certification for Joe Biden. Like lightning speed. It was amazing how fast they worked. Amazing. So after 2020, Congress went back and bipartisan did the election reform count, electoral college reform count, electoral count reform, something like that, and they pushed up that date. So we have less time to get that done. So we want to make sure there's a date certain. The nice part is too, added in that we're able to negotiate notification. So if there's an issue, Department of State certifying that election by December 10th. Week prior, they have to give us notification to make sure that if they're going to have problems to notify if they're not going to, because it's an important date. If you miss that date, electoral votes don't count. So right now, based on federal law and our law, the fact that we don't have a hard deadline for the Department of State, they could slow walk it. Now, let's say President Trump wins. We know where the administration is. Josh Shapiro has been out there numerous times. They could walk in there and say, "Oh, sorry, we couldn't get certification done, so we missed that December 11th date. Oh no, our electoral votes don't count. Oh no." So you're basically dealing in a Supreme Court case. You probably have another Bush v. Gore for that one. So really it does a great job of protecting to make sure that Department of State can't play games. And we have a hard date, there's notification. And then with judiciary, giving them a timeline to understand that this is an important date we need to hit. So make sure try to get your adjudication done as quickly as possible through that. So good bipartisan bill. Doesn't help either side, but ensures that the administration and the courts can't play games with that certification.
It just plugs a leak in an administrative loophole, essentially, correct?
Correct. It's about election integrity and making sure that bureaucrats and judiciary who are elected and partisan can't play games.
So you're adding some transparency to the process.
Yep. Yeah, transparency and notification. You have making sure there's statutes, some guidelines for to make sure that judiciary understands it's an important date and here's what you need to do to make sure that date's hit, as well as finally for the first time in our 100-year-old electoral law that there is a hard deadline for the Department of State to actually certify. So it's critically important.
And something you said about the court cases really came to mind. So right now we have a state representative who is in a race that is within 3 votes. Mm-hmm. And he has had lawsuits before the Commonwealth Court. Those didn't get decided until last week.
Yeah, so you're talking about a primary. You're talking over 2 months for lawsuits to go through. You just can't have the judiciary sit on these things. There needs to be a firm deadline, a firm timeline, and understand like this should take priority over other businesses because there are deadlines to meet within the electoral process. Particularly, we do not want to jeopardize our electoral votes here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
And not only that, I mean, there's plenty of time. I mean, and there's plenty of precedents for these courts to look at, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, there's no reason why these election cases should be drug out over weeks and months, right? Mm-hmm. It's very clear what the law says. It's very clear what past precedence has been. You know, let's move it along and get this done quickly.
Right, and it's just an expense you don't need to. It's just jamming out the court. Just take care of it, be done, allow, and has an impact on the fall. Counties can't get their ballots together without knowing the outcome of a primary, right? When you come into after the general election, who won, who's in majority control of chambers, you know, the majority control of Congress and the President of the United States is going to come through Pennsylvania. We need to make sure we're ready and prepared for it. This is a good bill to make sure no side gets an advantage and hold bureaucrats and judges accountable.
Well, the unfortunate thing really is that all of this could have been taken care of 2 years ago when Governor Wolf was here and you were chairman of the state government committee. You had a comprehensive election reform bill that encompassed everything from A to Z. But Governor Wolf decided to veto that bill and then read it. Usually want to do the opposite, right?
And I'll tell you what, you know, this is a rare opportunity for Republicans and Democrats to come together on election code. I look at that bill. It was a bipartisan. We got one Democrat vote on that bill. And there's just a lot of mistrust. Like you're trying to, people view it as you're trying to get an advantage one way or the other in an election system. I mean, from my perspective, I just want a system that works, that people trust, that is modern, that provides transparency, that provides accountability at every single level. But yet make sure we have full access. If you're legally allowed to vote, you should absolutely go exercise your right.
If you want.
But at the same time, every process should have a level of accountability. At the end of the day, there should be trust within our election system. And both sides, I've said this numerous times, both sides have questioned the outcome of President of the United States numerous times. This is not a Republican issue. It's not a Democrat issue. It's a failure of the systems themselves to bring that trust in, and that's our job.
Right, and when you reject an omnibus bill like what you did, what you end up with is this piecemeal approach where now you have to go back and tweak this or tweak that or fix that.
Right.
And so when we had an opportunity and we had legislation that would have been a comprehensive fix, Governor Wolf decided, no, I'm not going to do that because it was passed by a Republican. But the reality is that we end up in these situations where nothing gets done, nothing changes, and that's why we have to take these little piecemeal approaches and find those bipartisan ways and then move forward.
Right. And, ultimately, hopefully there's some trust that we can build upon this. Everybody negotiated in good faith. Republicans, Democrats, the administration. We negotiated in good faith. We have a good compromise. No one gets an advantage, but we ensure that we're going to have open and fair elections and make sure, at least with the electoral count, the goal is to not have any skullduggery happen, because we've seen a very activist Department of State go against Republican policies and Republican candidates time and time again. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen with our electoral votes here in the Commonwealth.
Anders, do people still kind of get animated about election integrity issues?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's still one of the most talked about topics, especially in York County. And I think you specifically, and I'm just saying this because I work for you, have been the most staunch supporter of election reform. And unlike what a lot of people have done, you've actually been one of the few to get bills across the finish line. And I think that's a great thing for York County to have at their disposal.
Anders, you're obviously a little bit younger than myself and Seth. Shocker. Breaking news. Do you
I'm
think
like 25? What are you talking about?
do you think that part of the problem we've always seen is that the younger folks don't want to participate in democracy? They don't want to vote for various reasons. Do you think that showing people that we have a safe and secure election process is going to help to bring that younger generation to the polls and vote?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that when you don't have trust in your elections, regardless of what side it's from, that causes a lot of turmoil within politics that just turn a lot of people away, whether for good reasons or for bad. And when you have that trust from both sides and you are able to have elections where you can't say there was voter fraud or you can't say that Russia got involved, whatever it may be, I think that when you can approach it from a peaceful manner and a fact-based approach, younger people will get more involved every single time.
Grove Unleashed.